The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Thank you all for coming this morning. I understand we have some people coming here from all across the country, Kansas, South Carolina. Wow, thank you for coming all this way to join us in this auspicious week of dedicating ourselves to the Buddhist precepts. So we at Shasta Abbey set this week aside each year to give the opportunity to those who wish to take the Buddha's precepts for the first time to do so here in the most magnificent and fullest way possible, which was given to us by our first Abbess, Reverend Master G.U. Kennett. Also, we invite people here who have already taken the precepts so that they can renew their commitment. It's endless training, endless practice, and it's lovely to have the chance to renew it. My teacher, Reverend Master G.U., described the life of our practice as climbing up a mountain, and that altar behind me that goes up represents that mountain. And Reverend Master G.U. said we climb it in a spiral, not in a straight line so much as in a spiral. We keep coming back to the same place, only at a higher level each time. So we keep working with the same precepts, training with them and practicing with them, and they never become worn out, you know. There's always something new in them. The week I spent here for Jukai always comes back to me in small bits and pieces, both of teaching and other things. For example, outside where the fountain is, scraping paint off that cloister wall in the freezing cold temperatures right after morning service before breakfast. I remember that well. And I remember the strength of the aspiration that brought me here to do that. You know, kind of a pampered city girl who wanted her cup of coffee before sort of setting foot into the wilderness. We didn't have coffee then. So, I mean, this sounds silly, but it's a reminder to me of the aspiration. Sometimes I get discouraged and I think, oh, you know. Then I think of that aspiration that brought me here and allowed me to be cold and coffeeless and miserable for the sake of the Buddhist precepts. So, the commitment to our precepts is a continual practice, and in one sense, following them is a road leading nowhere except where we actually start, which is within the embrace of Vairochana Buddha Dharma itself, the unborn, the eternal, that which is, the cosmic Buddha, Buddha nature, any number of names which none of which do the job, of course, because it's too big to give a name to. And we all know it. That's why we're here. So, within the embrace of Buddha nature, or truth is a good word, truth with a capital T maybe, we go on and on and on, always following the precepts and always becoming Buddha. We residents of Shasta Abbey renew our preceptual vows every 2 weeks in a renewal of vows ceremony, and those of you who join us on Saturday will get a chance to do that with us. We'll be doing it at the end of this retreat on Saturday morning at 10:30, so please come if you'd like to do that with us. And our reason for renewing the vows so often is that right along with our continual endless practice of the precepts, there's a continual tendency to revert to our ingrained and habitual and conditioned behaviors. We aren't perfect saints here. Recently, an abbess from a Vietnamese Buddhist temple visited us with some of her nuns. And she gave those nuns a teaching that I found really helpful. If I understood her correctly, there was a little bit of a language difficulty, but if I understood her correctly, she told her nuns that making a vow isn't the same thing as promising never to do something ever, ever again, and to hell with me if I do. But that it's cultivating an aspiration and moving towards that which the heart wishes to do. In this case of the nuns, it was not using the iPhones and iPads after evening meditation, which is, it sounds silly, but it's these little things that we can do really help us. They support the precepts. We think of ceasing from evil, doing only good, and doing good for others. Not using the iPhone and iPad after the evening meditation, when others may be trying to be quiet and sleep, is doing good for others. So it all falls within the precepts. I wonder how many people had the privilege of an upbringing in which the practice of virtue or even morality was foremost. I don't think I did, or if I did, I wasn't listening very carefully. It's natural, actually, and it's happened throughout the ages, that human beings in all kinds of environments develop habitual attitudes and behaviors based on greed, aversion, and delusion or confusion. This is humanity, human life. This is what the Buddha taught. And the Buddha taught the way to the cessation of the suffering that happens when we act from our habitual greed, hatred, and delusion. The Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths: suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way or path to the cessation of suffering, the Noble Eightfold Path. Part of the Noble Eightfold Path is three of the factors are right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Our precepts are an expression of those aspects of the Eightfold Path. When I was here for Jukai, those many years ago, the teachers here made one suggestion that I remember that I found very helpful. And that was to take one of the precepts and sort of highlight that for ourselves during a certain period of time. And of course you can do it, for a period of time with one precept, for a period of time with another. And this is, if it suits your way of doing things. I've found that practice useful, actually. It works. And so I just wanted to share with you how that can work and invite you to try it if you wish, and let you know also that it's not necessary. I mean, we all find our own way, and if another way comes up for you, then try that. So, for me, the precept I find very useful to focus on has to do with right speech, and it is, I will undertake the rule of training in order to teach myself not to speak against others. And you might notice I put the precept in a slightly different form rather than do not speak against others or to refrain from speaking against others. It's what I've been taught is an older form or a form from a different tradition of stating the precept, and for me it states it in a positive way, as a choice that I'm making, as my volition. I will undertake the rule of training. This is what I wish to do in order to teach myself not to speak against others. I'm a talker, I'm a bit of a chatterbox, and so a precept about speech appealed to me as a useful vehicle for my practice. Before I came here, in my pre-conversion days, gossip was one of my favorite hobbies. I loved to gossip, and I found that I could feel better about myself if I pointed out the faults of other people. This is no longer true for me, fortunately, after many years of practice. But, 30-some years ago when I took the precepts, it was very difficult for me it was easy to think about not speaking against others, but it was very difficult for me to actually do, because I got some kind of satisfaction out of doing it. Nevertheless, something within my heart-mind, Buddha nature within myself, innate goodness, kind of nudged me into trying it. And I say nudged because it was with a gentle firmness. It wasn't anything like this. That doesn't tend to work for me. I was kind of brought up in a way like this, and for some reason it tended to make me only want to do the thing that was being forbidden more than I already had. So the gentle nudge from my heart's aspiration, from the Buddha nature, is what helped me. So I thought, well, I'll try it out and see what happens. I thought of trying to work with the precept on speaking against others. Speech is important, and I have just one little story here from the stories of the Buddha's past lives as a bodhisattva before becoming the Buddha. The story starts out with a monk in the Buddha's entourage who has a habit of eating sumptuous meals with a group of people misled by a monk who had gone astray. Actually, the Buddha's cousin or relative, Devadatta, who was envious of the Buddha's position and influence on people, it seems. And actually tried to kill the Buddha at least once, and maybe more often. So this monk was tempted by the delicious food the people offered, and he spent much time in their unwholesome company because they would denigrate the Buddha and his teachings. The Buddha reprimanded the monk for choosing such companions and warned him of the consequences. To convince him to change his behavior, the Buddha told the monk the story of an incident from a former life in which the monk had been led astray by the harsh, unwholesome speech of those around him. In a previous birth, the Buddha said, the monk had been a great elephant belonging to a king. This elephant was known for his gentle disposition. Then a group of burglars made a habit of gathering near the elephant's stall each night to discuss their evil plans. They spoke harshly and encouraged each other to commit murder and other cruel acts. The elephant began to believe that their rough words were intended to teach him that he should behave in a similar way. As a result, the formerly noble elephant became murderous, killing anyone who tried to work with him. The king who owned the elephant sent his minister, the aspiring Buddha, the Bodhisattva, who was the Buddha to be, to investigate what was corrupting the gentle elephant. The minister overheard the wicked speech of the burglars and saw how it affected the elephant. He advised the king to send wise sages, known for their gentle speech, to talk together near the elephant's stall every night. The good and wholesome speech soon influenced the elephant to return to his gentle ways, and he was never cruel again. So that shows us speech is important. Speech can have a mighty influence. The Buddha defined wrong speech as opposed to what he taught as right speech. He said that wrong speech is speech that is false, malicious, harsh, idle chatter, or gossip. So that's the list: false, malicious, harsh, or idle chatter. So we can begin at a simple level by recognizing that speaking against others is at least malicious, and at worst, all of the above. So I'd add, personally, that wrong speech depends on and upholds a wrong view of separation. Separation between ourselves and truth, Buddha nature, other people, insects, the carpet, and all beings, whether animate or inanimate. We're not two. It's not two. So, contrary to wrong speech, right speech would be truthful and kindly and would arise from benevolence. And it would reinforce our practice rather than upholding a wrong view of separation. Another thing I liked about the precept on refraining from speaking against others, it's something everyone can do. It doesn't depend on any kind of esoteric knowledge. Anyone can do it. That's what I thought. Well, Margaret, you can do it. Something everyone can do. I have a few steps that I take in training with this precept, which, by the way, I'm still training with it. It wasn't just that first Jukai 30-odd years ago, and then I fixed it all up and it went away and it never came back. I still work with that. I'm not so inclined to speak against others anymore as I formerly was. I still find myself doing it from time to time, but it isn't just speaking out loud. It's speaking to yourself within the mind against others. Being critical in the mind. I used to think that, well, if I only think it, and this was, back in the day, I used to think, well, if I only think it and don't let it leak out, that's okay. Well, it isn't, actually. The Buddha taught the importance of the mind as the forerunner of speech and action. So, a first step for me in training the impulse to speak against others is to form the aspiration to follow the precept. In the beginning, I didn't understand the reason for my wish to form this aspiration. Actually, in my pre-conversion life, it seemed just fine to speak against and criticize anyone. Anyone and everyone was fair game, especially those in positions of authority and influence, public figures, politicians, celebrities, etc. After all, my reasoning went, if nobody resisted their wrong actions as I saw them, or pointed out the mistakes they were making as I saw them, then terrible things could happen. Wars, genocides, all kinds of horrible things. And it was my moral duty, in a sense, as my reasoning went, to speak out against leaders in particular, to keep these things from happening. Well, as most of you must know, because I see many people who have been doing practice for some time, our ability to change the way things happen is limited. My ability, personally, to go out and stop a war from happening by some direct action is really quite limited. If I were to call up the president and tell him, please not to have a war because I didn't wish it, that wouldn't do much good. So I came to the point of believing or knowing for myself that the way I could help prevent a war was within myself. So that's kind of how I helped myself. That's kind of how, or the Buddha nature in my heart helped me to see that speaking against others didn't have a kind of a virtuous quality to it as I was thinking it might. So the Buddha has a teaching to address this kind of reasoning, that it's necessary to speak up, to speak against. Now, I'm not just talking about speaking up, because sometimes it is necessary to speak up, and one can speak up without speaking against. And so this is how the Buddha taught this. And it's in a big book that was too thick to carry across over here, but I tried to put it in my own words, because it's also stated in the Buddha's words that are quite, they're from a different language that happened long ago, and so I tried to put it into more modern words. In brief, it says, if one doesn't say, so-and-so is a terrible person because he pursues only the enjoyment of sensual desires. Maybe he eats too much or gets drunk on the weekend and tries to seduce every woman he meets. Some kind of fault a person has. So instead of saying that, if one were to say instead, the pursuit of the enjoyment of sensual desires is beset by suffering, vexation, despair, and fever, and it is the wrong way. Then one is not disparaging someone, but is only teaching the Dharma. So the Buddha said one should neither extol nor disparage in speech, but only teach the Dharma. In other words, it's not framed in terms of persons. It's not a personal attack. People don't tend to respond well to personal attack. If somebody attacks me or speaks to me in a harsh way, I'm likely to run away and hide rather than to do what they're telling me to do. It's not that helpful. So if they speak to me with gentle friendliness and encourage me to do something differently from how I've been doing it, I'm much more likely to hear that and take it to heart. Speaking with gentle friendliness, there is such a thing as firm strength. I can't let a talk go by without mentioning the cat, so when I speak to the cat, asking him to get off the desk, I don't use the same kitty voice I use to speak to him when I'm cuddling him in the morning. I take a firm tone and I say, off the desk. I don't yell at him or curse or, call him any names. I just take a firmer tone. And he responds. He listens, but he doesn't kind of feel he has to hide. So that's the first step. The second step was to recognize myself when I caught myself speaking against others, whether it be the carpet or the person next to me in the meditation hall who snored at night or talked in their sleep or ground their teeth, whatever. To recognize myself speaking against. And that depends on keeping up the practice of awareness, paying wholehearted attention. Sometimes people say mindfulness. That's a good word for it. It's just used so much now, I'm not sure what it means anymore. So I say, giving our wholehearted attention to what our mind is doing, off the meditation cushion as well as on it. And the recognition arising from that practice of awareness means willingness to accept the painful states of mind and emotion that arise in myself as a consequence of my breaking the precepts. I can feel really terrible from time to time with the recognition that I've done something that is counter to the precepts. This is unpleasant, uncomfortable, and highly disagreeable, and for me anywhere necessary. If I'm going to get anywhere in following the precepts, it's necessary for me to undergo this discomfort with patient endurance. I'm not able to explain how it works. Maybe the word karma is a clue, I don't know, but the aspiration to do something about myself, as Reverend Master Jiyu used to say, makes this discomfort not only bearable, but also encouraging in terms of going on and training myself. Because I see that the practice of keeping the precepts works. I see how terrible it feels not to keep the precept, and so I'm encouraged to keep going. As long as I allow guilt and self-blame to depart, indulging in them is not part of the practice. So another step is restraint now, catching myself before speaking against. And this is challenging. I'm continuing to work on this one, catching myself before I start to speak against. Sometimes I start and then I go, oh no, maybe not, but catching myself before. It's a challenge. As I first started training myself in this precept, the recognition of breaking it always seemed to come after the wrong speech or during it, and then it would bring the necessity of not judging myself for failing to keep the precept, which isn't helpful, but to keep strengthening the resolve to keep it. This still happens. Change of heart takes repeated practice, and in my case, anyway, it depends on keeping up the practice of one's daily seated meditation, because the precepts in our meditation go together like this. So along with seated meditation, the practice of wholehearted attention is very useful in cultivating the ability to restrain the speech that might not be skillful, and recognizing that sometimes we're, quote, wrong, unquote. One of Reverend Master Jiyu's most helpful teachings to me was, I could be wrong. And when I think of Reverend Master Jiyu saying, I could be wrong, it's very easy for me to see myself as being able to be wrong. It's okay. It's okay to be wrong. So this, sometimes we're wrong, we do the best we can, and know that there's still room to do better. And that's good. That will mean we will continue to do better. This leads to something my teacher called spiritual adulthood. And that suggests to me the word responsibility, being willing to be responsible for what life throws our way, for how we react to it. Sometimes we just can't, we don't have anything to do with what life throws our way, but we have everything to do with how we respond or react to it. Sometimes life throws difficult choices. An example I used to hear from my teachers is the choice that a soldier or law enforcement officer might have to make in a time of battle, or a time when they might have to even go so far as killing someone in order to carry out the greater good, or what they see as the greater good, and to be willing to bear the consequences of that action, because it will have consequences. So to be responsible, usually in our ordinary daily life, most of the time we aren't faced with that kind of choice. But the small choices matter also. We're willing to take the consequences of what we do, and we're willing to ask in our heart of hearts, is this good to do? Is this good to say? Is this speech helpful? Is it necessary? Is it wasting time, mine as well as someone else's? Is it good to do? Finally, another thing I find most helpful in working with the precepts is the very first of the precepts, the triple treasure, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. I've developed the habit of taking these refuges silently for myself, reciting them to myself every morning as soon after I wake up, as I come to the awareness to do it, and every evening as I lie down in bed and get ready to go to sleep. I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha, wishing that the three treasures will guide and help me this day or this night. And then what your wish is, to be still, to follow the precepts, to be kind, to practice charity, tenderness, benevolence, and sympathy, whatever your wish may be, to ask the three treasures for help in doing that. Again, not even knowing what it means, but entrusting myself to the three treasures. I heard, I don't know that it's accurate, but I heard that Great Master Dogen, when he was in great pain from his final illness, used the three refuges as an important part of his practice, because in great pain, sometimes you need to keep it simple. And I thought that, well, whether that's true or not, if it's good enough for Great Master Dogen, it's good enough for me. And I've found indeed over the past several years, the 3 treasures, the 3 refuges, have been very good for me. So, there we are. The steps that I've mentioned as steps aren't 1, 2, 3. They aren't linear. They do go in that spiral. So, and they intertwine. So that's it for me. In conclusion, I invite you to try, if you wish, the practice with working with one of the 10 great precepts, or with one of any of the precepts for a period of time. You can do it for an hour, a day, a week, anything that you choose, if you wish, if it works for you. You can see if it works for you. The precepts are not rigid rules for conventional morality. They are the bloodline of the Buddha nature, or the water of the spirit, if you prefer. They are the expression of liberation from suffering. May you find them to be true for yourself. Thank you.